If you don't do soil modification because you have heave, then you can jack it up over here, and then 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, it could heave over here because you still didn't modify the soil.
Hey guys, I am back with Stabilize It podcast, and I'm here with Scott Horn of ProChemical Soil Stabilization. And Scott, we talked before just about stabilization in general.
Yes.
And what you guys do. But before we get into more specifics, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about yourself. I think I remember reading somewhere where you and your brother, is that right?
Cousin.
Your cousin.
First cousin, yes.
Had purchased the company in 2013
Yes.
from another family member. So tell me a little bit about how you got to be here.
Well, I worked at Coca-Cola for 22 years, and I had a career change and then had opportunity to come work for my uncle, which is the founder of ProChemical. He's the one that started all of it and trained us, and then worked there for 3 years and then had an opportunity to invest in it and buy into it. So that's what we did. Me and Todd did that. Bob is still part of our company. He's the founder, and if we need any expert advice, we still go to Bob Horn.
So with that, how old is the chemical stabilization technology? How far back does that go? Do you know?
It goes back 40 to 50 years if you do a lot of research, and it's usually around different additives, chemicals, and what they do, with soil stabilization. It all started in Israel is what I've read.
Wow.
And it wasn't for soil stabilization. They were trying to grow crops over there and were using a particular product, and they noticed that it helped with stability in the ground, the load bearing capacity in the ground. It was type of a fertilizer back then, so they were growing crops with it.
Amazing.
And everything else. So it helped with that, and then it just kind of evolved from there, and started using it for soil stabilization.
Wow, that's cool. So, so you primarily, what are the primary industries that you're working in? You work with builders?
We work with builders, land developers, homeowners, custom builders, commercial, just all types of construction.
Gotcha. So you work with homeowners, so you come in after the fact, right? When somebody has foundation issues?
Both. We get homeowners that are curious about soil stabilization, prior to building. And then we get, land developers and things like that. It usually starts with a geotechnical report that we get a soils report, and then we just kind of go from there, depending on the person that we're talking to.
Okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit, about the process. So let's just say I'm a developer and I'm going to build 1,000 homes in an area. From beginning to end, how soil stabilization is involved in that whole process. How does that start? You said they go to Geotech.
Yeah, they go to a geotechnical firm. That's where you start, is, ground up. So you're going to start with a geotechnical firm, and then they're going to do borings to find out, what type of soil it is. Is it a clay-based soil? Is it a silty sand, clay-based soil, and then they're going to recommend, what do you do with that particular soil before you build on it. And that's with streets, commercial, house pads, all of those things. You definitely want to start there.
So you talked about different soil. Can you talk about what different types of soils are there in general?
Well, there's all types of different soil. I think there's like 3,400 in Texas alone, But if you look at it from what we do, from a heave standpoint, which is a CH clay, and it just means clay, and the H means that it's high potential of swell. If you look at on a map, it's called Blackland Prairie, and it starts at the Red River and goes all the way down to San Antonio and then over parts of Houston. So there's a big areas of high expansive clay, And that's why we've got a lot of movement in Texas. So, getting a soils report prior to do any kind of construction, at least in Texas and other states as well, is, that's the number one thing that you need to do. First thing you need to do.
Got it. Okay, so then after the report comes in, the developer reaches out to you before they start pushing dirt around or anything, right? And that's
A
when
lot
you.
of times, if it's a big subdivision, yeah, we'll have a few meetings and, this is what we need to do. There's different recommendations in that Geotech report. It's all soil stabilization, but it could be moisture conditioning, which they dig it out. It could be water injection, or it could be chemical injection. Or they dig it out and just put select fill in it. It depends on the depth and where the swell is, because different, you know, you could have swell at 6 feet and everything above that, you wouldn't have any swell, So that would change their recommendation
Gotcha.
on what you need to do. So they're going to recommend 3 to 4 stabilization recommendation that you would do prior to building.
So let's just say if you have an area like 1,000 homes, is treatment the same throughout that whole area, or does it change in certain areas based on the soil?
It can change because I was just looking at a Geotech report yesterday for a subdivision, and not all of that subdivision needed to be injected because they had 6 borings, and then when you look at the borings, it indicates what type of clay it is, kind of like I was alluding to before. So that particular boring around, say, boring 5 had 2 or 3 blocks, right? So that represented about 50 to 60 pads. Well, right around in that area, it had a PVR of about 4.5 to 5.
And a PVR
Is potential vertical movement or potential vertical rise. But the rest of the neighborhoods, when you look at a boring map, it had what they call CL clay in it, which is clay that's low plasticity, and it had hardly any swell in it. So it can change in a subdivision. It can change from lot to lot too. That's why it's so important to, even on the individual lot for a custom home builder or a homeowner, know what's in the ground prior to you starting.
Sure. So a quick follow-up. Can you describe what boring is? I mean,
a boring is when they take a boring machine out there. It could be on a back of a truck. It could be a tractor. It could be an ATV, and it's a kind of like it's a drill pipe. They call it drill stem, and they're drilling down into the ground and they're pulling up samples. So it's a hollow pipe, and they drill down or push it down, then they pull it up in 1 foot to 2 foot intervals, and then they're taking that soil out of the ground and they're taking that back and testing it. They're going to tell you what type of clay it is, if it has a swell, what it does when it dries out, what's the potential swell that it could be, because soil clay may already be like in the winter, it may already have enough moisture content in it that it's reached its potential vertical movement. But when it dries back out in the summer, it goes back down. So they're going to bake it in an oven, a 500-degree oven. Some of them do that, some of them don't.
That's cool.
And get it dry, and then they're going to see how much water that soil is going to take to calculate that PVR.
How deep do they generally go?
They typically go to 25 feet. I mean, when they hit rock, you're done. But I've seen them 25 to 30 feet. 25 is usually pretty typical,
Wow,
And then within that Geotech, report, it'll give you the recommendations. And then if you go back and look at the boring logs, it tells you by depth from 0 down to when they terminated the boring, what type of soil's in there. Sandy clay, fat clay, lean clay, and it gives you the PI numbers. And PI means plastic index. That's the particle size of the clay. So a higher particle size means it has a higher potential, has a higher retention of water, which means it's going to swell.
Sure. So Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So
Yeah, there is.
that is super deep. I mean, that is 25 feet is very deep. So when you guys inject, I think I read somewhere you inject up to 15 feet. Is that right?
We can inject up to 15 feet. Typically, injection is about 10 feet, but we do go 15 feet. We can. And I've seen it to 20. We don't do that.
But you only do that if it's necessary.
Only if, yeah, because a lot of times you'll hit clay, CH clay, at 5 feet. And then it goes all the way down. The upper 0 to 5 didn't need anything because it's a different type of soil.
Gotcha.
It could be a CO clay. It could be a sandy loam. It doesn't have anything. So they calculate that overburden as well from 0 to 5. Say it doesn't swell. They're calculating that overburden. And then they're looking at from 5 to on down and seeing what that swell is. And then they're doing their calculations, and then they'll determine the injection depth, or if it needs injection at all, if it needs any kind of soil stabilization. So there's usually 2 or 3 recommendations within the report. They're pretty well easy to understand, especially if if you do this all the time. Homeowners, I explain this more to probably the individual homeowners than anything else.
So the process of injecting itself, let's just say you do go down 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit more in depth? We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
But you have a bunch of rods on a skid steer, right? And you have water that's pumping through the rods. The water is mixed with your solution, the chemical.
Mm-hmm.
So first thing I want you to tell me a little bit about the chemical, and then tell me a little bit about the process.
Okay, well, I'll start with
as much as you can about the chemical, because it's
Well, the chemical it has certain food grade chemicals in it. It's really
so safe, is what you're saying.
It's safe. So when you put it into the ground, as long as it comes up, and we've tested this and we tested it all the time, it's the pH. So milk is a 5. If I put chemical in the ground, it comes back up at a 7, then it's safe for runoff, storm drains, and everything else. It's a mild chemical. Most of that stuff is food grade. Well, actually, all of it's food grade, and it's a dilution ratio of 300 into 5,500 to 6,000 gallons of water. So it's very minute.
Gotcha.
Doesn't need a lot of chemical to change the polarity of the clay, and that's actually what we're doing. So clay is a negative, water is a positive. They, bond, and we take that ability away from it to doing that. Chemical takes a negative charge out of the clay.
So down, 10 feet,
Mm-hmm.
when you are changing the polarity of the clay, I'm just trying to visualize what happens to the water. I mean, water is constantly moving, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
water is, so you've got a tractor or skid steer. You got 4 to 5 rods. Skid steer's 4, tractor's 5, and you're pushing those rods down. They've got a 360 pattern. So it's got 8 holes spiraled around 360, and you're pushing those rods down, and it's pushing 80 to 90 gallons a minute at a low PSI. So we're not shooting a 1500 PSI. It's about 200, 250, tops would be 300. So you're not fracking. You're just, what that soil will do is just start sucking in that water.
Roger.
And then that's where you get your heave. That's what you want it to do. So once you've got it to its potential vertical rise, which is usually one pass. We can usually do it in one pass. If it's 105 out, and it's been baking in the Texas sun for, a couple of months, then you may have to do 2 water passes because it's so dry. But once we get that process done, which is usually a day and a half, then we come back with water and chemical, and we're putting that dilution ratio in the ground because it's already pre-swelled, and we're getting that mixture, that stabilizer in between those clay platelets to take that negative charge out of the clay. That's the permanent thing that we do.
Right.
That's the difference between soil, a water injection, and moisture conditioning. They're just putting water in the ground, and it does change the PVR. And a lot of times they'll put a membrane on top of it that's 18 inches down the ground. But, if that sits for a year or 2 years, it goes back to its natural state.
Right.
Chemical won't allow that because we're changing the polarity of the clay. We're modifying the soil.
So what I'm hearing you say is that another type of soil stabilization is just injecting water in there
Yes.
you're forcing the clay to
Take
expand
water in. Yes.
to its maximum.
To its maximum.
And
Yeah.
then what you're also saying is that what you're doing differently is the chemical is actually making that permanent because after the clay is expanded, it's not going to take in any more water, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because it's already reached its liquid limit, so to speak. So you swelled it up, and then the chemical goes into the lattice or clay platelets, takes that negative charge out. So what you're doing is you're taking the heavy bond of water that goes in between those clay platelets, right? That's where you get your heave. And then when it dries out, it goes back down.
Right.
We're just stopping it from doing that. We're making it act like a sand.
Okay. So next question is, I found a report by a realtor organization. They did a survey of about 1,000 people, and a quarter of those people said that they would rather sell their home as is rather than fix the foundation. And I've seen some foundation repair costs could be, up to $50K in some instances. Talk about that with respect to what you guys provide.
Well, typically, to answer that, I would say that as soon as you see any kind of cracks in your home, doors, things like that, then get a hold of your builder if it's under warranty. If it's not, then get a hold of a foundation repair company. Get a structural engineer, get a topo done
What's a
on
topo?
it. A topo is a measurement that they do inside your home that tells you if it's settled over here or if it's settled over here. And they do it. They do it every room. So they'll take 5 or 6 calculations for every room that you have, then they'll come up with a whole report and they'll tell you the deflection of the slab if it's settled over here, if it's pushed up over here. So what actually is going on. And then that structural engineer is going to make a recommendation, or your foundation repair company is going to make a recommendation. And a lot of times the key to it is, like I said, as soon as you see it, get that ball rolling before it becomes a $60,000 repair, because a lot of times we can come in and stop that soil from moving, especially because it's around the perimeter. And then a lot of foundation companies are getting on board with this too, because they realize that you've got to modify the soil if it has a high PVR and heave, slab heave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we control. So if you can get on the forefront of it and get out there and get some experts, and we're one of them as far as the application goes and stopping the soil from moving, that's your best bet. If you buy a used home and you have a lot of foundation issues, where you've got 2-inch cracks in your brick and things like that, then it's going to be a costly repair.
You would come in along with foundation repair, because foundation repair is literally fixing the foundation. And then what chemical injection is doing is
it's modifying the soil. Yeah, we don't do any type of foundation repair. We're modifying the structure of the soil. We're taking the ability away that it associates with water, with the ground, that causes heave. That's what we're stopping. We're going to make it where it doesn't have the ability to absorb that water and swell that ground. It's going to be more flow through that. If you want to kind of visualize it that way. It doesn't isolate the ground where it goes around the injection. It just lets it go through it when the water doesn't react with that negative charge.
Gotcha.
We're modifying it.
So would you say that is more of a permanent solution?
That is a permanent solution versus just water injection and moisture conditioning. It's a more permanent application.
I wonder what the ratio or what the percentage is of people having had foundation repair and then having had it done again a couple of years later.
It happens. I mean, it does. I hear about that a lot. I mean, I'm not into the foundation repair business, but I do have individual homeowners that call me and say, hey, I've had a certain company come out and do the left side of the house. Now it's moving on the right. And then, I'll tell them what we offer. And then they call the foundation company and they come out and fix the other side. And then the following year, the side they fixed before is moving again.
Wow.
So now I'm not saying that happens all the time, by no means.
Sure.
But it tells you, the story is that there's water coming in and migrating through that soil, and it's a CH clay, and it expands, and you really haven't fixed the problem. You've fixed the house, but you haven't fixed the problem, and the problem all starts in the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how you come alongside other foundation repair companies. We were talking earlier when you were describing the what is it they put in, the piers that they put in?
Yeah, piers. Yes.
And how they jack it up, and what happens if there isn't some kind of stabilization done inside those piers when the work.
Well, the foundation companies that we work with, they'll have their representative go out, and like I said, do a topo on it, and then they recommend a chemical injection around it. Not all the time, only if it's applicable. But we'll come in and we'll do a chemical injection around the perimeter, and they'll let it sit for 3 months, and then they'll do another topo. And if it quit moving, then they'll let the builder or the homeowner come in and do the cosmetic repairs, because again, they're on the forefront of it and it hasn't moved a lot. It's got some things, but it hasn't moved a whole lot, but it needs to be addressed. So we'll do it that way. And if it doesn't move, if the topo was within range, they just do the cosmetic repairs, don't do anything. If it helped, and they see a settlement issue, right? So we stop the heave, but then they see a settlement, and that's already in the report. Then they'll come in and do their piers underneath the home, jack it back up, and get it all level. But if you don't do soil modification because you have heave, then you can jack it up over here, and then 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, it could heave over here because you still didn't modify the soil. You didn't fix the initial problem, which is the ground. You can fix the house and you can jack it back up, and you can keep it from settling. But if you've got slab heave, which is differential movement by water migration, lifts your slab up, during the wet season, and then it goes back down in the dry season, that's where you get that differential movement, and you haven't fixed that. You haven't addressed that. You just addressed a particular problem.
Right. So we were talking a little bit about if you don't do soil treatment, but you do have a company come in and install piers. Mm-hmm. Well, tell me about the process of, I know you're not a foundation.
Well, what I've said, I'm not, that's what I didn't want to say too much about it.
So just to clarify.
Right.
But talk about that process.
Well, I can tell you about my house.
Okay.
How about that? Okay. So I live in an area where there's not heave. Okay. But when I was talking to the guy that was doing my house, he dug up around the perimeter around my home, and then he takes concrete in sleeves, round sleeves, right? And I guess they're probably 5 inches across and 6 inches long. He's digging under and he's pushing hydraulically down with a bottle jack or whatever those companies use, and he's pushing that pier down. So he's pushing it down in the soil, then he stacks another one, he's pushing it down. Well, eventually, probably at my house, it was about 6 feet. Then it started jacking the house up, right? And then he leveled it. My house hasn't moved. But back to, I know what's in the ground. I've got a soil report. I know there's not CH clay in there. It's just settlement because it's a sandy loam. So I knew what needed to happen. So it gets back to knowing what's in the ground. If you've got heave, you got CH clay, you need to know that. If you don't know from a homeowner's perspective what's in the ground, then you need to. You need to get that some kind of knowledge around what's in your particular lot, or at least what's in your area, because you can go out online and look and say, what type of soil do I have in this county? And it'll pull a topo map up and tell you. And then you can dial down into that and it'll tell you what the PVRs are, potential vertical rise.
Right. So, okay, tell me a little bit about some of the other services that you offer with respect to hand injection. I think we talked, so hand injection, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about hand injection?
Hand injection is the same as tractor injection, except it's just done by hand. It's done by one probe. It's less intrusive because we can go around the perimeter and we can stop foundations from moving. We can do sidewalks, we can do swimming pools, driveways. We can go inside your house, which is rare, but I've done those where we drill through the foundation and we stabilize the soil. We've done a lot of commercial jobs that way, and then they come in and put foam underneath that and jack it back up. But it's usually where you can't get a tractor and smaller jobs. So it's the same process. It's stabilizing the ground. We're modifying the soil.
I'm just curious, when you go do a pool, they have dug the dirt out of the pool. Let's just say they go down, they go down to different depths.
Yeah, sure.
So let's just say they're down, 10 feet. You hand inject on the floor of that pool? Do you go to the sides?
We'll inject the belly of the pool prior to any concrete or gunite being in there. So we'll take a ladder, depending on how deep the pool is, and we'll get down there by hand and about 150 foot of hose, because usually the pump's on the street, and we're just injecting it. It's about 25 to 30 gallons a minute. The dilution ratio is the same. We're doing it on probably 1 foot centers, 2 foot centers, because we're not pushing as much flow out like we would with a tractor.
So when you say 1 foot, 2 foot centers, what do you mean?
It means that we'll push it down in 6-inch intervals. So it's a 10-foot rod. We push it down 6 inches and we count, or we wait for refusal. Usually waiting for refusal is watching the water come back out. Then we shove it down another 6 inches until we get down to the depth that we agree to, which is usually 10 feet. Then we pull the rod back up and we move over a foot or 2, and sometimes 3. It depends on what's coming back, what I call refusal, coming back out of the ground. Because as long as it's taking it, as long as that soil is taking that water and that chemical mixture, then it's working. As soon as it starts bubbling up and refusing real well, then it's not taking it. Then you move over and start again.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Let's talk about, there's other types of foundation repair. And I know you said you don't do foundation repair. You come alongside sometimes. Tell me about, in your instance, how foam applies, or when somebody injects foam into.
Foam is great if you're repairing sidewalks, driveways. You're lifting them back up and you're getting them level. I've seen them do homes that way too, So it's good for leveling. I think it's good overall, but you still haven't addressed the problem. So if you lift a house up, major structure, and you lift it up an inch or 2 or whatever the measurement is, but it had heave, and that's the reason that it may pushed up over here and settled over here because it's a slab with post-tension cables in it. You still hadn't addressed why it moved, right. which is the ground again. So those are what I call, at least in my mind, those are foundation repairs. You're fixing the home, but you're not fixing the ground. You haven't done anything to the ground. So when water migrates back in, that soil is going to push up on that foam and just push it right back up again.
Right.
Or settle. Either way.
Gotcha.
So it's good, but it still doesn't address the core problem if you have slab heave movement.
All right, let's talk about areas where they are not as familiar with chemical stabilization, and they may be doing something different. How do you address that?
Education. We just address it through education. We do a lunch and learn in those areas. We talk about what's a more economical solution. What they're doing in those areas, if they don't know about water injection and chemical injection, moisture conditioning has been around for years and years and years.
And
moisture conditioning is where they dig it out. They completely dig it out, and then they're putting it back in within 6 inches lifts. So they'll dig it out, And then they put 6 inches of dirt back in, and then they spray it with water, they compact it, and then they go all the way up 6-inch lifts.
That's a lot
all
of
the
work.
way up, and they have to dig that out. Or they dig it all out, haul it off, and put non-expensive clay in. So what we offer is a more economical solution. You don't have to dig it out. You don't have to haul it off. You don't have to pay a high premium on select fill. And it's just more economical. And that's working, but we have to have like a lunch and learn and explain the process, you know. And we can do the same thing with water. Water injection really is just as good as moisture conditioning, but they don't even know about that. And then we come in and explain that piece of it. And then we also tell them, hey, here's the benefits of putting a soil stabilizer in the ground too. This is what it does. Here's the university study that proves that it works. You know, this is how it does it. And it's an educational process. It's a slow process. It's the same process that my uncle faced, Bob Horn faced, 30 years ago.
Sure.
So with his innovation, with hand injection, I think I've said that in another video, with hand injection, it's just grown and it's more and more accepted. And now it's even proven because of the longevity of our company and other stabilization companies that do chemical injection. It just works.
Okay, so let's say you are a developer and you have a project to do, and you may be building 500 or 1,000 homes. What's the process to get a hold of you, and how does that all work?
I mean, you get a hold of me, usually it's by word of mouth, website, things like that. I know a lot of land developers, they're going to look at that original that preliminary geotech report they've got, and then they're going to reach out to their dirt contractors. They're going to reach out to me, and they're going to make the most economical solution for them. A lot of times it's chemical injection because you're not digging it out. You're not moving a lot of dirt. So there's a lot of variables in there. But our niche is what's the most economical solution for my customer. And we're going to get the results down to 1% or whatever the Geotech guidelines are. That's what they look at. That's what the land developer is going to do. They want to do it at the cheapest cost that they can and have the most effective product that they can as well. They want the end result.
So then let's talk about partnerships. What kind of industries do you guys like to come alongside and work with?
We like to work alongside developers, land developers, your tract builders, your big home builders and things like that, and geotechnical firms, and then we do a lot of Dallas Builders Association, Mississippi Association, Builders Association. So we're involved heavily in those things too to get the word of mouth out as well.
Scott, thanks so much. I appreciate the time that you took today to talk about soil stabilization. Anything you'd like to add before we call it quits for today?
I just want to add that we want to answer any soil stabilization questions that our land developers, our customers, our homeowners would have. I want to direct them to our website, which is prochemtx.com. And we want to further the education around what we do and the process. And we want to make sure that you have a stable ground for your next project.
Awesome. With that, we will see you guys on the next episode of Stabilizing.